Good morning, everyone. I trust that you are all well. Good morning to our daily program. Thank you for joining us. Thank you for joining us last night. Wasn't it outstanding? A really phenomenal presentation and speech by the one and only Edwin Shuker in his own inimitable way. Since last night, I found out that he's actually being nominated again as a vice president to the Board of Deputies. And we wish Edwin, if you're listening, if you're watching, we wish you bracha v'hatzlacha, tremendous success. Please God, you should continue to be a light to the nations around the world, not just to our nation. Good morning, everyone. Let me just say a few good mornings before we progress. To Clarice, lovely to see you on this crispy morning. Peter, Estelle, David, Richard, Carol, and Rachel in no particular order. That's just what the order that it comes up on my screen, but it's lovely to see all of you today. Please God, next Monday night, there was a huge crowd and gathering last night, 8:15 on StreamYard. That means on Facebook and YouTube to watch Edwin Shuker. Next week, we have the now Rabbi, Chazan, Cantor, Reverend, what other titles are there? Michael Plasko, MBE, who will be sharing with us over his 40 years some extraordinary stories and reminiscing about Woodside Park. He told me some stories a couple of weeks ago, which I never heard and were, really, really remarkable. Major hair stand on end, coincidences and quote unquote and other events. And really, it was great opportunity to hear one of the great leaders of our community and one of the outstanding ministers in the United Synagogue over the last 40-50 years. So that's next Monday night at 8:15. But let's now focus our attention, if we may. Today's learning, of course, is dedicated firstly for Refuah Shalema, for all those that are unwell, and secondly, of course, we also dedicate in memory of those that have Yortzeit today or are saying Kaddish. So I want to share with you, basically, we're just going to understand one word in the Torah. One understanding of one word. That's how deep the Torah is. Okay? And what was mentioned by Gila on Shabbat is that, you can have the beauty and the uniqueness of the Torah, of the Bible, is that a 5-year-old can pick it up and understand it and relate to it in one way, and you can have a 105-year-old, one of the greatest sages in our people, who can pick up the very same book, who he studied it the whole of his 105 years in great depth and breadth, and yet can still find new meaning and new significance for his life. That is why it is the work of God's hand, and therefore it's something worthwhile for us to immerse ourselves in as much as possible. Vayishma Yitro, this week's parsha is all about the giving of the Torah. Isn't it extraordinary? Have you ever wondered, what name do we give to the Sedra, which is about the giving of the Torah, divine revelation, right? Moses receiving the 10 Commandments and the Torah and coming down. I would have thought the greatest accolade, the title should have gone to, wouldn't it be good to call it Moshe, right? Wouldn't it have been good to call it something about giving of the Torah? Why do we refer to it as Yitro? Do you know who Yitro was? Friends, Yitro was a high priest of Midian. He was Moses' father-in-law, and it wasn't nepotism that got him the title of this parsha. The reason why it's called Yitro is because of his response and reaction. Let's learn one word. Vayishma, that Yitro heard. Yishma, Shema Yisrael, from the same letter, same word. So Yitro heard. Rashi says, Ma Shmua, what did he hear? Shama Uva, he heard and he came. Kriyas Yamsuf Umelchemes Amalek. There were two things that Jethro heard. One was the splitting of the sea, which we discussed last week, and the other one was the battle with Amalek. And firstly, to point out the obvious, why these two in particular? Well, if you think about Kriyas Yamsuf, that was the supernatural that was really between us and God, and in Muhammad Malik is the involving, engaging in the mundane, right? That we saw God's hand in the mundane, not just in the supernatural. So therefore, those are the different spheres in which a person operates. But what is telling and why he deserved the Sedra of the giving of the Torah to be named after him is because he didn't just hear, but he listened. Okay? Right? Or if you want to do it the other way around, as Americans say, they don't just listen, they hear. Right? I hear you. What does that mean? Everyone hears. We hear billions of things every single day. We're all in a room together and we hear. But there is hearing, or there is listening, and there is listening. Okay? You know, we hear things, but actually, does it make any type of impression? Does it influence us in any way? What is telling about Yisro's listening is that he was somebody who internalized the news that he'd heard. You know, we hear so much news, friends, every day, and I'm not coming to be critical. It's just an observation. Think about the amount of information that our brains are processing every day. Click of a button, another news. We watch the news, we hear the news, we hear news stories, we read articles. Wherever we are, we're plugged in, we've got headphones on, right? We're absorbing huge amounts. But how much is actually being internalized? How much is actually making an impression of us? How changed and transformed are our lives as a consequence and result of what we hear in our daily lives? I would say, arguably, less and less. Less and less. The more that we're bombarded, bamboozled, day in, day out, by news and views of all different types of people, of all different stripes, it makes less of an impression on us. So the question that they ask about Yitro is, what's the big deal? Yitro wasn't the only one that heard Kriyas Yamsuf and Milchemes Amalek. Yitro wasn't the only one that heard about the splitting of the sea and the battle of Amalek. But what was the difference in Yisro's hearing? That he internalized it. Everyone heard, but only one person, Yisro, made an impression on him, transformed his life, made him act upon the information that he'd heard. He was in awe of what he heard about God's kindness and miracles that he performed for the Jewish people. He recognized God's hand in the battle with Amalek, which so many didn't. They just saw it as a matter of strategy and stealth on the part of the Jewish people. And yet he was somebody who responded and reacted to what was going on around him. You know, when I remember Rabbi Lord Sachs, he did an interview. He did an interview, may his memory be a blessing, several years ago now. And I think it was a podcast. And they asked him, what was one of the favorite things that he bought himself recently, right? What was the favorite thing that he bought himself? What's the best buy that he could get? I would have thought he would say a new book. You know, he had over 10,000 books in his collection, literally wall to wall around the whole of his house was books. Very eclectic group of a collection of books, a library like nobody else. I would have thought it would be something like that, maybe his yellow tie collection. But what was it that Rabbi Sachs bought and that made, and that he was held so dear? Noise cancelling headphones. That's what he said. Why noise cancelling headphones? Said Rabbi Sachs in his own inimitable way, because in life we find ourselves with so much noise that surrounds us, so many different conflicting voices, so much information. We fail to hear that kol damama daka, that thin, small voice, the voice of God in the world, the voice of God in our lives. And he said the beauty of these noise cancelling headphones is that he was able to be in touch with himself and to be able to reflect to go through a process of introspection and to understand, what does that voice want from me? That was what Yitro was able to do. By Yishma Yisro, he wasn't the only one that heard, but he was the only one that responded. He was the only one that internalized that it made a difference. Sometimes, friends, less is more. Maybe we should be a bit more selective with the amount of noise that we listen to in our lives and in the world. That, you could spend the next 3,000 years, eternity, listening to the news, listening to the news stories, being led by the nose, by the media and the social media. But does that make us any better? Does that enrich our lives in any way? Do we come closer to God as a result? Arguably, no. And therefore, the message which we hear loudly and clearly is a clarion call to action from the Parsha, from Yisro, and from Rabbi Sachs, Zichroni Livrocha. The idea is quite clear that we have to be selective as to what we are hearing, what we are listening. And when we hear something, when we hear a gem, something that's going to enrich our lives, a kernel of truth, something that we can internalize in our lives, then we have to grab it with two hands. It's such a precious lesson. I know I take it on, I personally am just hearing myself say it, and it's making an impression. And, I try sometimes just to mute the noise, mute the phone, not look at my phone for 5, 10, 15 minutes. Can we just concentrate? Can we really be truly present? Mindfulness is something that more and more people are engaged with in the world. If you haven't heard about it, please look it up. There's a wonderful app called Mindfulness, I believe, which I think is free, and you can meditate and just really be in touch with yourself. It's not hocus pocus. It's very much in keeping with what we've spoken about today. But please think about what we've said today. There is so much information that we are being bombarded with in our daily lives, and it's exhausting. It's overwhelming. It doesn't necessarily improve our lives. So it's something for us to consider, whether we are able to switch off to switch on. Wishing everyone well. Please God, we should hear good news, and we're delighted, of course, once again to hear the good news from America, that they all came out of the Texas synagogue unharmed, and we wish them all well. And please God, everyone should stay safe, keep well, and look after yourselves on the ice outside. Okay, and please God, we'll see you tomorrow and the rest of the week. Have a great day. Take care.